So, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. Do I have to push recording, Joe?
No, I've got it. It's recording now.
Okay, you've got it. Thank you.
We're on.
And thank you, Joe and Nancy, for making this possible. And thank you, Sally, for helping us co-host this roundtable discussion. So just to remind everybody, our topic this evening is supporting elderly and community. So that's actually a many-faceted topic. And I imagine we can easily spend an hour together talking about this and not nearly cover everything. Yeah. But I think it's a beautiful way to get to know everybody and to be together for a bit, and hopefully everyone will come away inspired or with some new ideas or some new thoughts on this important topic, and we can strengthen and inspire each other. So at this point, what if we go around and introduce ourselves, and we can start. We're Sam and Becky Durgan, and we are down in our Woodcrest community, Woodcrest Bruderhof, which is in Riften, New York. It's the oldest community at this point from the Bruderhof movement. Actually, both our parents joined in the first year of Woodcrest's beginning in 1954.
Right.
And we have spent most of our married life in Connecticut, in Deer Spring community, and then up in Platte Clove. We were there for 22 years and raised most of our family in Platte Clove, which is like an hour north of us from Woodcrest, up in the Catskill Mountains. And recently we've had 2 years in Australia after all our children had left the nest with our community, the Danthonia community. And since June, now we're here in Woodcrest. But we've had the opportunity of, since Becky is a nurse, an RN, since we were married, we were always paired up with like an elderly couple or my parents or Becky's mom. Right after we were married, we were with a couple called Robert and Dorothy Headland. Robert was blind, Dorothy was bedridden. And that was quite an enriching experience for our new little family to share the joy of having our first child with them as like our stand-in grandparents while Becky was looking after Dorothy. Anyway, that's enough about us at this point, but let's go around and introduce ourselves briefly.
Shall we go next?
Yes, go ahead, Sally.
Okay, Sally and Orwin Youngquist. We're from Reba Place Fellowship, which is in Evanston, Illinois, and also has some people in the city of Chicago and Rogers Park. The community's been around for 64 years. I've been here for 49 years, and you for...
Yeah. So a bit more, but not too late.
So we each came in our 20s, and we're now in our 70s or so. So anyway, we've seen the group above us age on out, and 9 or 10 of them have died, and we have quite a few in their elderly years. So we can share more about how we've learned to be caring for one another.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Joe?
Sure. We're Joe and Nancy in Waco with Hope Fellowship. We've been here in Waco for 35 years. Hope Fellowship itself is 29 years old, I think, or 28, somewhere in that. And you want to just mention about caring for elderly we've done?
Yeah, I guess I would say that the community started with a lot of young folks for the most part. Joe and I were in our mid to late 40s at that time. And So, you know, in some ways we have been some of the elder people in the community. But it's been an interesting journey watching all of us, those that were 20 who are now 40 and 50, and just that whole process of how we mature. We had the privilege of having my parents, who were Southern Baptist missionaries, retire, and they built a house right across the street from us. And then Joe's mom, when his dad passed away, moved in with us and lived with us for 9 years. So though it wasn't a strategized plan or anything like that, the community embraced all of that and had a little experience, if you will, of how we go about living with and enjoying the gifts of and caring for those who are further along in the physical journey.
And then 5 years ago, our 3 surviving parents all died within 2.5 months of each other. So, and we got down to the very last. My mom and her dad had moved in with us in his last days, and they both ended up passing away the same morning in our house and adjoining bedrooms. So 15 minutes apart. So we've had experience with growing old and with dying too. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
I've never heard of something like that.
Yeah. It usually works well if whoever just talked calls on somebody else. So Elizabeth, how about you?
Hi, yeah, I didn't know you could rename yourself. That's nice. So I'm Elizabeth at Jubilee Partners in Comer, Georgia. And actually, let me stitch the headphones. Sorry, I'm still figuring this whole thing out. Uh-oh, do you still hear me?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Sorry, I know I'm like the youngest person here, but one of the least Zoom experience. Yeah, so at Jubilee, I mean, this is a small community, and I think it probably at least half of the members, long-term members, are in their 60s or 70s. And so, but probably the main reason this caught my attention, like this topic, was just because we recently spent a month up in New York where my husband's parents live, helping them out. And his mom, after we got back, she was diagnosed with atypical Parkinson's, which I can't remember the exact name of it, but something kind of like Parkinson's, but different. And so anyway, we've invited them to live here, and not that they're particularly interested right now, but it's still a possibility. And so, yeah, those are just a couple of reasons for my interest. And yeah, my husband and I, we have a 1-year-old daughter, so.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. So let's hear from Stefan.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So I'm thrilled to be here. The topic is a great topic, and we could spend the whole weekend talking about it. So in our community, which is planning to move together to Louisa, Virginia, there are 7 of us, ranging in age from 3 years of age to 93 years of age. And so this topic is of great interest to me right now. And I just want to underline its importance as deeply human, but also very countercultural. Many of my friends who are asking me, well, what are you going to do as you get older? You know, I mean, what a question. And what's going to happen to the members of the community as they get older? And my response is, we're going to be together as we get older. We're going to care for one another and we're going to die together someday. And it's very, very strange to see people's responses. I guess I should understand it and really understand it. But anyway, I appreciate the topic. So I guess that's all for me at the moment. Thanks.
Maybe Laura's next.
Oh, sorry. I'll second that.
I'm Laura Carruthers. I'm at Hope Fellowship here in Waco, and I'm a little bit late to the call, so I didn't hear everything in the introduction, but I work on the care and kind of a committee of caring at Hope Fellowship, and that's one of the reasons that I'm here. And the other reason is that my mother, who's 80 years old, lives with me and has lived with me for the past 5 years. And we're just moving right along with that and trying to figure that out as we go. And so, yeah, that's why I'm here. So let's see. Megan, can you go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Megan. I'm from Reba Place Fellowship in Evanston. I live at the Clearing, which is a household that has a lot of elderly people and aging people in it. And Julia Spelser died at home.
We just lost your sound, Megan. Megan's internet goes in and out sometimes.
Okay. So is there anyone else who?
Hi, I'm sorry, my internet was unstable.
Okay.
When did Julius died at home, and I live at the Clearing, which is has a lot of elders in it. And I came to this because I want to hear what other communities are doing with their elder.
Very good. Thank you.
I'll call on Susan.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm in Durham, North Carolina, and I live in a community of families and folks of all ages with and without developmental disabilities. And believe it or not, we're all getting older every day. And yeah, I just want to learn better and more whole ways to do life well to the end. And I'll call on Eric.
Thanks. I'm Eric Karlberg, and I don't currently live in a community. I've been running an educational farm for the past 12 years and really curious about community. And I also I'm pretty closely involved in the care of my mother, who is only 71, but is progressing with Parkinson's.
Okay.
Where are you?
Oh yeah, I am in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and I work in the northern suburbs of Chicago.
Okay.
Nice. So is there anyone else who hasn't spoken yet? Okay, great. I think we got everybody. So it's quite a team we are here, and thank you for taking time. So just to start this conversation, Becky and I were thinking of 4 different areas we should consider. One being our elderly members are a treasure to any community. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe we're all aware of the loss we have in today's world, where even with the best of intentions, too often our elderly are sequestered away from the rest of their families, the rest of society, in nursing homes, assisted living places, and too easily forgotten or neglected by loved ones. And in doing so, we lose the richness of experience of even 40 years ago, and many extended families could look after their elderly until the time of their death. And living in community gives us an opportunity to do this differently. And many of you have touched on this in your introduction. The joy we can have, the support we can have, the appreciation we can have for each other, living in community. And of course, there's many parts of the good book, the Bible, that encourage us in these thoughts. Just a few. In Job 12, wisdom is with the aged, and understanding in the length of days. Or from Proverbs 23, listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother even when she is old. And here's one that encouraged our neighbors and us. Proverbs 16, gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained in a righteous life. And some of us are given this crown earlier than others. And of course, the fifth commandment, honor your father and mother. And this is actually for all of life, not only for when we are dependent on them as our parents, but also later in life when they become dependent on us. Honor father and mother really is a commandment of God. So here at the Bruderhof, our elderly are actually often counted on as important voices in our members' meetings. And we often turn our young parents who may be struggling with issues of education or raising children to turn to the elders or older couples in our communities for advice and to get wisdom. Or if we have young couples that are getting to know each other, seeking marriage, a lifelong relationship, often in our meetings when we're thinking on this topic, we'll ask different older couples to tell their experience or what wisdom they might have to share with this young couple. So they're really a resource. And in our community, we're thinking our school intentionally uses our elderly as an important resource. Some examples of this in history, a lot of the students will be given a history buddy, which will be an older member on the community. And they're assigned to spend some slot every week with their history buddy. It might be a breakfast invitation, Monday breakfast every week. A little child shows up at your table and you go over your life story or whatever questions they may have, ask you about. History buddies, reading buddies, use them as guest speakers in classes for history lessons. And here at the Bruderhof, school OPA is a thing. That's a grandfather who's attached to the school, basically a resource for any kids that need some time out of the classroom and maybe spend a bit of one-on-one playing chess or doing a little project in the carpentry or whatever is needed. We've often had a role in our school for, an older couple to help out. So in our family, in our experience, again, both my parents, we lived next to throughout the growing up years of our parents. And if I think of my son, Robert, he would have known my father, Wilmot Durgan, as a child and heard stories from him. And then every week we would have a grandparents' night where we'd all go over to grandfather and grandmother. And then later, he wound up being a caregiver as a young man. My dad, probably of the three that we cared for, needed the most help in the last year of his life, really full-time, 24/7 care, which we thank God that we were in a community because we, it was a full-blown experience with bed baths and Hoyer lifts. And if anyone's done it, you realize it's a project and you're glad you can spread the resources. But the grandsons kicked in, I would say, and Robert kicked in. And then later, when he asked for membership, we were invited down to Bayboro, Florida, And he spoke of his grandfather as being a formative force in his life that made him decide what was important to him in becoming a member and asking for baptism. So it went both ways. Care of elderly provides opportunities for service. It helps us be patient, to slow down. Becky, maybe you can tell about your care of your mother and how that impacted you.
Well, first of all, I think all of you probably have so much more to tell us, because your stories sound really amazing, and I hope to hear so much more from you all. Yeah, okay, so Sam and I have the privilege of caring for 3 of our parents as adjacent neighbors, you know, within the same dwelling house, and carrying them till the moment of their death, and also then experiencing the whole, you know, wake and burial as we do it within our Buderhof community, which is another topic. But I think what impacted me the most was the caring for my own mother. My mother had been widowed at age 61, and she lived nearby us for many years. And I always honored and loved her. I mean, you know, I was a normal rebellious teenager and I didn't always love her, but I valued her very much. And when our children were growing up, they spent so much time with her, and she had a wonderful influence on them, and, you know, taught them about trees and nature. She was a botany major in college, and just a wonderful, peaceful grandma. So we always appreciated her. But then she spent some years living with my siblings in other locations in New York. And at age 90, then she moved back to live with Sam and myself and our youngest daughter, Christina, who was 18 at the time, and my 2 sisters who were unmarried. And we made a family household together, caring for her. And that was the time at which I really feel like I understood her soul so much more. I spent every morning with her doing her personal care and just going through daily routines. And then after the 2 years after she passed, I just had to reflect and realize that it was only after spending that time with her and just feeling her character and her, you know, the way she felt strongly about peace and faith, and it just went deep into my heart who she was. And I thought, you know what, she got through being a widow 31 and a half years. She went through so many of life's struggles with all of her kids, 9 kids, and what kept her intact, you know, it's such a deep faith. And, you know, paying that forward, you know, I should have faith to face the hard times too, like she did. And it gives me this going forward a vision that I think if I had missed out on those 2 years with her, I wouldn't have experienced that so deeply. So all I can say is honoring and caring for our own parents, or they may not be our blood relatives, should give all of us a lot of well, first of all, respect for them, for who they are, and their faith and their grit. Or maybe they don't have a deep faith, but to love them all the same. And it's just a privilege. That's all.
Thank you, Becky. So that was the one area of how our elderly are a treasure to our communities. And 3 other areas we were thinking of is our elderly and medical intervention is a topic we should cover in this conversation. And we have thoughts on that, but we want to move this along to hear from others. The third is the role of dying, our connection to eternity. And then the 4th area we could consider is support systems, ideas to make it all work. Becky and I realized if you read David Jansen's handbook on community, has one chart on thick and thin communities. Buderhof is categorized as a thick community where we have a a fairly broad spectrum to pull from resources, but it would be very good to hear from you who are on smaller communities what ideas you might have of how to get the support you need to do this properly, to fully treasure our elderly.
I think we have a new guest all day.
So Sally, over to you.
Okay, well, I see we have two gentlemen who have joined us. Maybe quickly we could just hear your names and where you're from.
Yeah, that'd be good.
I'm Daniel Troutman. I live in Richfield, Minnesota, and I've seen the elderly cared in what, by your definition, a thick community called Bethany Fellowship back in the 70s and 80s. Since then, I've lived in extended households, and my wife has suffered through early onset Alzheimer's for over 15 years. Wow. And some of that time, we still had people living with us in an extended household. Ultimately, she had to move to a healthcare facility, and COVID took her. Last year. But so my experience has been different or varied from that standpoint. I've seen aging and death and dying in different ways.
I'm Jason Porterfield. I used to be part of an international network of Christian communities called Servants that lived primarily in the slums of Southeast Asia, but we had a community in Vancouver as well. And have also been just privileged to learn a lot from the Bruderhof over the years in writing and some visits. And one of the things that really touched me the most was the deep care for the elderly there. So I was excited to be able to join this meeting. So thanks.
Well, welcome, David and Jason. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, well, I'm Sally Youngquist, and just to talk a little bit about Reba Place. So we have 41 members, and about half of us are over 65. So that shows you that we are kind of tipped toward the older generation. And we had a community nurse who kind of got overwhelmed with what coordinating care was was requiring of her, and she has retired. So I guess one of the structures I'll say that we have adopted that I think has actually been a real good model is for having people who need to do kind of discernment about their care and needing particular help. We have convened circles of care around them where they can name the people that they feel the closest to. They could be community members, family members, neighbors, and those people are the ones that they call together when they've been to a doctor's appointment and certain possibilities are put before them, and do I do this or do I do that, or just discernment kinds of things about medical interventions. And we attempt to support the elderly to age in place. So we own 20 properties in this neighborhood and 3 in Chicago and a retreat house in Wisconsin. So we live within about 3 or 4 blocks of each other, and we have a variety of houses. We have apartments and big houses. So if you're an elderly person, might be by themselves in their apartment. If that's what they prefer, they might be a couple living together, or they might live in a big household like Megan's, where a number of people have their meals together and care for one another. Is it 10 or 11 people there? How many?
Yeah, we have 10 people living, 10 people in the whole household.
Yeah, 10 people in a 3-story house with a lift inside and outside to the porch. So anyway, we've made our housing accessible for people who need wheelchairs or help getting upstairs and things like that. So I think that it's really been helpful to access, where possible, government assistance because our assets are low enough, or our income is low enough that the government will pay for a certain number of hours that seniors might need. So in caring for the seniors who need it, we have a combination of community volunteers or family members or paid caregivers, and in some cases our own members are the paid caregivers, and we've also used agencies, but this way we're able to have enough care for the people who really need a little bit more skilled care or more, you know, like we have one member who lives alone with Parkinson's who's 95, and we staff her from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and then we have a camera monitor on her at night. So anyway, we've just been able to figure out different things to do as different people's cases advance. But I would say it's really emotionally challenging to see beloved people that we know going downhill, losing their memory, losing their functioning, not making it to meetings anymore. But on the other hand, it's just such a privilege to care for them, and it just feels like holy ground. And one of the actually good things about COVID has been that we had to do all our meetings on Zoom. And so we actually have some of our elderly members coming to Zoom who weren't coming physically to meetings at night anymore. So it's actually increased some people's ability to stay involved. So yeah, I guess those are some things that I thought of to say about our model. We've had, in my mind, I could think of 10 members who have died, plus some people's elderly parents that were being cared for who have died. And in all cases but one, people have died at home. And that just feels like such a privilege to be able to surround them and sing and pray and not have lots of machines and tubes. And, you know, so a big thing that our community nurse did before she retired was she got us all to work on our advanced directives and fill out the 5 wishes forms, really make it clear that we don't want to be resuscitated in most cases, so that we don't have to have those interventions, and we can call in hospice and we can accompany people to die at home. And that has been a very holy process. Most cases we've been able to like build the casket ourselves and bury people at Plow Creek, which is a farm that was a community, sister community, or be cremated and scatter their ashes like locally near our meeting house. So we've, you know, been able to do some creative things with that. But it's, you know, something we expect will still be going on in our midst, because we have 3 in their 90s, 8 in their 80s, 6 in their 70s. So we're all just coming along. But these elders model to me graciousness in stepping back from leadership, graciousness in the aging process, amazing faith, ability to still be praying for people, mentoring people, doing different things that they are able to do with whatever their skills and talents are. And I see people still growing and still changing into their 90s, you know, in this faith context. So I have learned a lot from these elders to prepare me for when it's my turn.
Beautiful.
Sally, thank you so much. I'm glad you bring those points up also about the importance of writing it down, what your wishes are for the future. We've come to do the same.
Yeah.
And it can be very important.
Peaceful end.
Daniel, you briefly shared a very touching story about your wife. I mean, a need that we actually want to carry with you. You know, that she died in this time of COVID. That's tough. That's very tough. I don't know if you have any thoughts for this gathering.
It's still it's still a reality for those of us that are, you know, of the age that many of us on this call are. COVID, you can't really kind of do the things that you normally would. The government intrudes and makes decisions for you. In our case, I couldn't be with her when she died.
Yeah.
I couldn't see her when they removed her body. I had to stand masked at the street side. So there were a lot of bizarre things just in dealing with governments and administrations and bureaucracies that were just doing CYA around legal matters. So, you know, I don't think you can plan for those kind of things, but that is the reality of a COVID world at this point. So hopefully your communities can stay free from that virus, but that is an eventuality I think any communal context needs to address, and we'll probably still need to address it over the upcoming year at least.
Anyway, Daniel, thank you very much. We really think of you.
Thank you. Margaritas, I had someone who worked with a lot with third culture folks, and he encouraged me to write my lament. He said evangelicals tend to not want to make laments because it sounds like whining or complaining or a lack of faith. And I said, well, I don't really need to do that, but I did it anyway, and I found it really healthy because I am angry about various things, but I choose not to be angry about them just simply because Margarita's not angry about them, and there was nothing I could do. But it is sometimes just a reality that, you know, things don't go ideally, and you just have to accept the path that God sends you on. And COVID is one that we just have to think about when we're out now.
Daniel, could you share your written lament with us? Is that something to send to us?
I could send it. Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think I have it handy here.
If you would. And, you know, I'll send out a distribution list for people on this call. So that would be great.
Yeah,
it would be appreciated. Joe, do you have any further thoughts? Jones.
Well, I guess just, you know, you were mentioning communities with less infrastructure and support, which Hope Fellowship might fall in that category. I mean, so far our care for elderly has really been in the area of caring for parents. I mean, we did that. Laura is doing that. The DeLaurels are doing that with parents in their home now, and some others have parents that have moved to town. I think we've just been very fortunate and found ways of a lot of mutual aid. I mean, one example was when my mom got less mobile, community gathered together. It was a very cold day in January, I think, and we built a ramp. It's called the mother of all ramps because our house is up so high, but it goes down the back of our house, and then we carted my mom down the ramp and Nancy's parents up the ramp because they were across the street. But everybody was very good about visiting my mom. My mom became a member of Hope Fellowship before she died. I think it's just a lot of prayer too. I mean, I think God really was just very faithful. And I feel that overall in the life of Hope Fellowship as people have really started to take seriously the care of their own parents. And God seems to be providing and the community responding to that. So it's not as organized as I would think the Bruderhof is, or I know Reba is, which those are wonderful, but I think we have a real sense of God's providence with us. Would you add anything, Nancy?
Yeah, I would say that there has been a small group of us some years ago that read Being Mortal, Atul Gawande's book, which was very impacting, and getting the 5 Wishes book and so forth. I think for a lot of the younger folks in the church, it just wasn't a reality real close to them at that point. I think that has changed now, with parents aging and people caring. So you might say we're kind of in the beginning stages as a community of understanding how we go about this. And we don't all live in households. There have been some households, but most of us live in very close proximity of each other. And so it allows for a lot of creativity, and that's usually how we have responded to different issues, is kind of dealing with what God has given us and going forward. But your examples, I'm sure, will be very important, and those who are working on these things like Laura and others, I'm sure will be knocking on some of your doors. I will say that it kind of surprised me. I mean, I grew up in Uruguay, South America, and I always knew that I wanted to care for my parents and have them, if not in our home, very close by. That was a part of the culture that I grew up with. But so I didn't think about it as being anything particularly special. But we have had some international people in our lives who were around and saw. And of all the things that spoke to them was our care of our parents. Mm-hmm. That made us be human and loving. And, you know, even though they might have disagreed with many other things, but the fact that we cared for our parents spoke volumes. And so I know that, I'm sure you all hear that at Bruderhaus and at Reba and so forth, but for younger folks who are still trying to make a life for themselves, you know, they may not think of that as being witness or incredible testimony, but especially to people that come from other cultures, that is just so different from what they understand happens in the United States. So always, yeah, being mindful of that people are watching. People are, you know, seeing how we care for each other, and especially at the end of life.
May I ask a question?
Please.
So, first of all, Daniel, my sincere sympathies, my brother, for your loss. And I just want to ask a question related to loss and our elder population, and particularly addressed to those of you that have been in community living together for some time. For the past 5 years, I've been sadly and joyfully focused on one idea, and it's the idea of lament. It's the focus of my PhD, and in particular, the Irish lament. And what it's led me to is a realization that this doing of death that cultures did for millennia was deeply human, powerful, even beautiful, and somehow we've lost it, in a nutshell. And many churches I've heard from, and scholars like Walter Brueggemann would say, we need to recover this lament. We need to bring it back. We need to somehow find the essence of this communal grieving. And so my question for those of you who have lived in community for some time is, how do you do death? Do you do it well? Do you lament together? Do you pour out your grieving, your anger even? Daniel, you mentioned anger, I think. It's one of the things that churches don't do well. And I'm curious as to how, and of course this relates to the older population. My mother lost her husband a couple of years ago. She's 93 now. She literally threw herself on the coffin in the cold winter of Buffalo, New York, and wailed and howled. Wasn't planned, but it was the most cathartic, empowering experience I think that we could have prayed for. And what I find in many churches is that there's this tendency to hold back, to not release our emotions. And so I'm curious, how do you do death? And particularly in the older population, because as ancient cultures teach us, it was actually the older women that led this liturgy of lament, and the older women carried the sorrow of the community. So with that, I'll be quiet. Thank you.
Yes, an interesting question.
I'll take a crack at it.
Go ahead.
The congregation in Rogers Park as people from Nepal and Africa as a regular part of the congregation. So one of the mothers who had children with her also had her mother with her when they made their way over to the United States. Her mother died, and we took the coffin out to Plow Creek to bury it. And when we got there, she did make a lot of noise, much more so than I've heard at any of my parents or grandparents' internments. And she was very free with flailing her body around. I don't know quite how to explain this because it's behavior that I would imagine was typical for her. But, you know, it was not typical for what I had seen in my Swedish and Norwegian forebears.
Yeah.
But she was very verbal, very aggressively expressing herself, and hopefully it helped her get through it. I don't really know what helped and what didn't, but she did work on it.
She was Congolese, but yeah, we're Mennonites. We're a little bit more restrained, I would say. But I think one of the things that happens when we have the memorial service for somebody, there's just lots and lots of storytelling. And there's also truth telling. What I've really appreciated about funerals at Reba Place is things are said about the deceased that might be uncomplimentary or might speak to some of their weaknesses, you know, and that just is so helpful, because if you just hear all this positive stuff that doesn't really feel like the person you knew, there's something that's kind of false about it. But to be able to just say, oh yeah, you know, this person could be really crabby, or for somebody who talks so much about forgiveness, this person could really hold grudges. I mean, just to hear the truth being spoken in a loving way is a very freeing thing. And I guess one thing, you know, he talked about our young people turned off by coming to a community where there's so many older people and so much elder care going on. We have a young man who's been around for a really long time who's actually wanting to join now because of attending the funeral of one of our leaders who died and hearing all these stories about who this guy was in our midst and all the things he did and the huge, complete sacrifice of himself to Jesus he did to be the person he was. And that was so impressive to him that it made him want to join the community. So I guess those stories are really powerful. And one more thing I'll say about stories, this isn't one meant, but we captured some of the stories of these aging elders before two of them died, and it's a book that's out you can get. It's called 7 Radical Elders, and it's edited by David Jansen. Okay. But it's so helpful that they were oral interviews were done while they still had memory, and these are people who stayed radical from their 20s on into their 90s and didn't like compromise and go back and join the world. You know, they just stayed radical. They talked about their mistakes and their failures. So it's a really rich book, and that's getting a lot of traction right now. So I'm just glad to have captured their stories, and that's something we can do with our elders too, and learn from those stories. And they really appreciate being listened to too. Yeah.
Thank you, Sally. Go ahead, Jason.
I'll just be real fast because I'm really just here to listen. But the Bruderhof actually just had a video come out like last week. I think it was called "What Happens When Someone Dies," and it was really well done. And I can put that link in the chat if people want.
By Laura, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Good. Thank you, Jason. That's good.
Helpful, because we won't cover it all here. She's really good.
No, I would say, wow, is that an ever opportunity for a community at its best, in caring for the elderly and then standing together with the family in their time of grieving, and then doing, as we call it, the community here, the Bruderhof, doing the last service of love for that brother or sister who's passed on. and being able to tell memories. And in our case, it's many times we are laying to rest some of the founding fathers of our movement, you know, people who have been real trailblazers or who have gone through the jungles of Paraguay, experienced hardships and faced circumstances that honestly, Becky and I have never and never will need to probably face such adversity. And so it's really an inspiration, and sharing their lives together is vitally important. And I'm building on something Nancy said earlier, that it's a witness of our communities, the way we care for our elderly and the way we love each other into death and through death. And I'm thinking of Jesus, you know, saying, people will know you as my disciples by your love for one another. And this love for one another means the most when we're loving someone who's not just like us, you know, someone who's elderly or someone who has a disability or someone who needs your love. And just one thought, I know we have to sometimes encourage some of our folks as they get older. There's a tendency to hang on to your independence. We all have it. And you'd love to do everything yourself. And there's something very good and something we should admire about that. But there is also a point, and you have to find a loving way to discern this point, where you can tell this person, tell your aging person, you know what, please give us the opportunity. So many of us young people, we need an opportunity to serve somebody. And if we can help you, you're actually doing us a service. You're helping us to live out our discipleship. Because if we can never help you, that's a problem. You know, that's not why we're living in community. So anyway, I've heard it used quite effectively, and it's been very good. It's been very good, and it can bring surprising relationships. One point we put away some of the motorized scooters just to have some of our young men interact more with our elderly by being their pushers. You know, if they need to get up that hill to lunch from the factory, after they put some parts together, you know, this young guy was going to be there. He was going to show up. He had to be there, and he was going to bring grandma up the hill. And it was just a little point of contact and of service. And anyway, I think it's important.
I want to add a little more to your stories part of it. In '71, I was at Riften for a little while, and I had tea with this woman who had joined the youth movement before it was a Bruderhof. And it was just a delightful time to sit there and hear her tell stories about the life she had lived and where she had been and who she had met, and saying, hey, this is a great asset. So I like the part about saying the old people are a treasure, and how can we receive that treasure from one generation to the next?
Sam, Susan had her hand up and was wanting to share.
I think it's so encouraging to hear these stories. I think the way we care for elderly or don't care for our elderly is one of the great tragedies of our culture, and our Christian culture really isn't much better than the world, and it's so sad and so rare to be able to hear stories like the ones you're telling. So I'm so grateful for those. I wonder if some of you who have had these experiences of providing care for elderly people that you love in your communities could talk about some of the hard things, or what have some of the challenges been, and some of the ways that you have walked through those challenges that you could share.
Can I jump in, Sally?
Yes, I was going to say, you look like you have something to share. Just go for it.
I have a lot of things to share. I live at the clearing, which has 10 people in it, age range, 2 people in their 30s, 2 people in their 50s. I think the rest, no, 3 people in their 50s. The rest are 70 and above, 2 90-year-olds, no 80. Yeah, something like that. So I'm helping Hilda Carper. We have to actually 7 radicals. We had 3 people in my house from there. Julius Belser, who died, Peggy Belser, who's still amazing, and Hilda. So yeah, we have 3 awesome radical elders. But I see aging in process. I see that every day. I help Hilda. I am one of Hilda's caregivers right now, so Shar can do taxes. And it's challenging and it's a privilege because she's 94. Thank you, 94. And she likes things a certain way. I have the privilege of getting her up in the morning at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm 9. How many 39-year-olds get up at 6 o'clock, no, 5 o'clock in the morning to help a 94-year-old at 6 o'clock in the morning? I'm one of the few and don't get paid for it. But I get paid by love and hugs. But it's challenging because I have to like help her out like that, and it's challenging, and rub her back and make sure she feels comfortable, and then she can use her walker, but you can tell she's getting slower. And I feel it's a privilege to help her, but it's challenges. And sometimes I love kids, younger kids, better than elderly people. They're great people, but I with COVID, and then one more thing, Bob Lemke, who died and it will be June 4th a year ago. He died at home. It was unexpected. I remember I was sleeping and Carl turned on my light, pounded on my door and go, Bob died. I'm like, what? And then long story short, we had a lot of people come in. I think Ruth Ann and Sally came over and we all sung him out, and Hilda came down, and he wasn't in hospice. He wasn't, so we had the police and ambulance and everything. Yes. Yeah, and Barb came over and Barb's like, yeah, he's dead. I'm like, ah. I'm the one that cries. I'm the one, just like Sally Norman. I'm the emotional one. But it's a blessing. I can lament and cry. It's a privilege to be hearing with seniors because they're teaching me things I don't know what they're teaching me sometimes. I mean, yeah, I feel like they're teaching me something, but I don't know what it is yet. So I'm grateful for everyone. And I probably talked too long. I think the challenge is knowing what to do, and just caregiving is exhausting. Even though I don't have a lot of work with because of COVID, but it's you need to take time for yourself or just go, hey, sure, I need a walk. You got to be with Hilda for an hour, and just take time for yourself too. So, yeah, and we support people in our house aging in place or aging at home.
Thank you, Megan. And by the way, our call is supposed to be an hour long. So if anyone needs to dip out at this point, that's fine. Very understandable. Daniel, did you have something you wanted to share?
Yeah, I just, we all have different levels of what we call community, and I think everybody that lives this way for Jesus' sake understands that it's not just the value of community, it's a witness, it's the life we have together. But when you're talking about old age, it's not wrong for us to think about a bigger community than the households and the associations we have. there were a lot of hard years taking care of Margarita, and eventually for safety for other people, I had to ask people to leave. And it was just my son and I left taking care of my wife. Ultimately, due to a lot of the difficulties of how she went through dementia, I ultimately couldn't do it anymore on my own. And probably the hardest thing I've ever done. Never lived somewhere else. But the community of healthcare workers and the opportunity to give a witness to the goodness of God in a difficult situation was greater with Margarita living in that healthcare facility and me being there every day than having our little holy huddle in our household.
Wow.
And so the care that these people, they became our brothers and sisters, our friends and relatives. And we shared life in a way that most congregations, I don't think, ever get to that level. So we need to embrace the community of healthcare, the healthcare community as we think about aging in our own communities, to see this not as a barrier or something to avoid, but something really to embrace and participate in for Jesus' sake.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's really beautiful.
Eric, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just wanting to echo what Daniel said, and especially just thinking about, you know, a lot of caregivers in the healthcare community or in, you know, visiting services. I mean, they are often not paid well. You know, they are people from different parts of the world, different cultures, marginalized people in our own culture. And yeah, I've experienced it a bit with my mom, to be really connected to people that have lived much different lives than mine in a very intimate way through caring for my mom. So I think that, you know, that seems a lot like a place where we would find Jesus too.
Amen.
Amen.
So what we're saying is the physical structure may not be as important as the spirit in which we care.
Yeah.
God works in so many ways.
We have, as everyone said, African members in our community, and one of them we were able to hire to care for one of our elderly members. She had cared for her own elderly mother in Africa. And Dorothy, the lady who had her as a caregiver and subsequently died, felt like she was doing something by teaching Zawadi English, and Zawadi was doing something by caring for her. And after Dorothy died, I mean, Zawadi spoke at the memorial service and said, "Oh, Dorothy was my best friend," and sang at her funeral. So it was a very mutual blessing of those, bringing those two together. You know, and we have a number of Afro-Caribbean women who were caring for Vera next door, who, yeah, one of them moved into one of our rental apartments across the street because she was so impressed with the community. So there is that opportunity to interface with
So beautiful.
people we might not otherwise. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm thinking of a elderly gentleman near one of our communities out in Spring Valley in Fayette County. And we were at a point one time when there were quite a few older brothers at this community that needed looking after. And we were very busy in our shop, and we realized our neighbors actually needed work. So we hired some help. And this one elderly gentleman, Chuck Siegwald, came every day to look after this older brother as a hired help. But he wound up, you know, even after his job was done, he just kept on coming to visit. and you know, wound up asking for baptism and wanted to draw closer to the community. It was great. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate what Daniel's saying. Let's think of the community as bigger than just our little community. Mm-hmm. And when our members do go into a medical facility, also even Eva, Becky's sister, okay, she wasn't elderly, but she died of cancer. Mm-hmm. She was actually the youngest sibling. But her witness getting her treatments in the cancer ward, you know, just reaching out to everybody she was with while the poison dripped in, you know, whatever. Mm-hmm. It was
the spirit.
Quite something. What she actually, the contacts we had with the people that she had interacted with during those treatments.
Spread the good word.
She spread the good news, yeah.
I've got one other story the morning that both my mom and Nancy's father died here at our house, which was obviously an intense morning. We weren't quite sure when either one would pass away, but we knew it was imminent for both of them. We had a lot of people in and out of the house that morning with us. Nancy's brothers were here, our two of her brothers, and so forth, but in adjoining rooms. And actually, I was with my mom. Nancy and her brothers were in with her dad when my mom passed away. And, you know, Nancy was in the other room. She didn't know. But we had a caregiver who had come in. We had paid for a few hours a week to help my mom, and she was with us that morning. I was very grateful to have her in the room with me, and Bonita is her name. She prayed. I couldn't quite get the words out, and I asked her to pray, and she did a very heartfelt prayer. So just, yeah, you know, God brings many people our way, not only those, I agree so much, not only those in our community, but, and thank goodness we're ministered to by them also. Nancy did run in. I went in and told her, and she ran in, and then we immediately ran back to the other room where her dad passed away a few minutes later. So, yeah.
Joe and Nancy, you could have taken this gathering. Wow. That's quite
somebody, the lawyer, I was dealing with my mom's affairs, and the lawyer afterwards, I was telling her about all three parents passing away so quickly, and she just looked at me and said, "Has anybody investigated you?" You know, so it was just so odd. I mean, people have said they've heard of married couples passing away, but these were in-laws, you know, in different rooms the same morning. So yeah, it was odd.
That's amazing. That's astonishing.
Yeah.
I mean, Susan, behind your question, you know, you're asking for stories of what did others find difficult or whatever others found hard. I guess one thought I have is that, okay, maybe some of us are speaking from the richness of our experience in community, but I'm hoping nobody has a hesitancy to ask for help when you need it. We can't afford to go under. You know, it's possible to take on too much humanly, and we all need help. And sometimes you do someone else a favor by asking for help too, you know, and even if it's a less than ideal circumstance, you know, don't feel like you need to be the hero that carries this ball by yourself. If it's not realistic, it isn't, you know.
Yeah.
Daniel's experienced this.
Yeah, I'll tell a story of that. I was taking this lady next door to her every 9 weeks appointments to a retina specialist. She had to get a shot in her eye, and it took getting her from a wheelchair into 3 different chairs in this office. So it took like 5 transfers, because in and out of the car, and then these 3 chair transfers. And she was just getting weaker and weaker and not being able to really support herself on her legs. And it was just getting so difficult. And I finally said to one of the younger guys on our caregiving team, I don't think I can take her anymore. It's just too hard on my back. So it's like, I can't do the physical part of this, even though I've, you know, accompanied the medical part of it. And so he took it on. And this particular person who's 95 ended up getting COVID, and he took on the entire care for her until she got over the COVID. This is a dad with 3 young kids, but he's like strong, and he just stayed in the apartment and got her through it. And she has survived COVID at 95 with Parkinson's, which is just amazing. So just so sacrificial on his part, you know. I mean, it's taking her a while to bounce back to where she was, and I'm not sure she will, but just to say it's amazing that he was willing to do that. And I just have to step back when it's getting too physically hard for me.
One of the things I'm hearing as a continual theme through our conversation is stories. And it's such a beautiful part of lament. Without the stories, we cannot lament. And it seems to me that the older population, the older members of our communities are such a great treasure house and is such a great healing source of stories upon stories upon stories. I'm sure some of you have had the experience where someone you love says to you, did I ever tell you about the story of, and of course you've heard it 100 times. My mom does this all the time. She's 93. And I'm just now beginning to realize, wait a minute, of course I've heard that story before, but in her mind, I never have. And so my response needs to be as though I've heard it for the first time. And that's such a gift. So there's that.
Beautiful.
One question that comes to my mind is, you know, some of your communities have had elderly all along, and you know, like at Reba now, over half are older. You know, different variations of elderly, but for younger communities, you know, what are some ways that, I mean, the stories is an important way, but, you know, what are some ways to help younger folks start seeing this aspect of life? Because I think the older life can inform the younger life. I think it's Richard Rohr's in his Falling Upward that talks about the importance of the first part of life and the second part, but you need to know the second part to live your first part well, you know, something along those lines. So anyway, just my mind is spinning on some, you know, what are some ideas, you know, or do you just have to wait till you encounter these situations? And not everyone in our communities will have the same interest or focus, but, you know, how do we create those cores of people who are looking into it and thinking about it and praying about it and educating themselves before it gets to be a real need in some of our communities?
A lot of our communities have nurses, and they usually see the whole spectrum of life. We had a nurse in our church who helped start something called Senior Connections. And this was an agency that, like, college students or anybody could sign up to be paired up with an elderly person who wanted a visitor in the community. So it really went beyond the Reba community. It was just something Evanston wide. But if somebody really wanted to become friends with an elderly person, there's probably agencies like that in a lot of our towns where if a younger person wanted to do that, they could, you know.
Okay, good.
A lot of questions.
Well, I think this has been a very good time together. I don't know if there's any last questions or thoughts or wonderments, but one thought I have is that here we are, we're all from different communities. It's not out of the question for us to support each other. And, you know, it's happened before. I can't promise anything, but, you know, where a young person in one community can go to help another community that's struggling with an issue, it's a possibility.
I've heard that John Perkins asked the Buderhof to send people to help take care of his wife, and you have, so I know that happened.
Right. So we have some young people down there. Go ahead, Susan. Are you saying goodbye? Okay.
I was just saying that's so cool. That's so awesome. I love that. I was celebrating.
I like
benefited from Bruderhof people coming into our community with a lot of love and care. So
okay, good.
I'll send out the contact list with Daniel's lament and with the link to the Bruderhof video. I'll also just send the citation about Atul Gawande's book, Being Mortal, which I think Sam and Becky, you all may have read.
Yes, I was going to mention that book. Yeah.
Others of us have found that really excellent. And you could always reply all to that email when I send it out with any other resources.
Why don't you put the 7 radical elders on that?
Radical elders and yeah, I did a review on that that's up on the Nurturing Communities website. So I'll link in the review too on that. But other resources, please let folks know about those.
I want to say something real quick. Sam at Bruderhof, I love how you pair kids with buddies that are older. And I think that is just a wonderful, awesome, healthy thing, and keep doing that. So I approve, and you don't need my approval, but I love that because I have a 2-year degree in child development. So that is so cool. Thank you all.
Reading buddies. That's, every child learns to read, and they need to read aloud to somebody who can correct when they mess up. We find that as a natural connection between elderly and children. And then when these elderly wind up having their last moments, this child who may be now a teenager, this is special for them. They have memories attached, and it's important.
I think we have to just keep modeling what we feel is important, and it'll spread in little ways. And
so I think it's an effort we have to make on all of our communities, that every community that has multiple entities to it, we need to find ways of continuing to stir the pot so that we all interact with each other and have the full experience. So thank you again, Joe and Nancy, for making this possible. And God bless every one of you. And Daniel, thank you again for telling your story of your wife, and especially the personal stories we heard this evening go to the heart. And we thank you all.
And maybe in the emails we can discuss Stefan's question about how do we do dying, because there's so much more that hasn't been touched on.
It's true.
So much more was brought up tonight, but we can continue communicating.
Great.
Okay, goodbye to all. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Rest be well.
Okay.
Peace. Thank you all.
Thank you, Megan.
Welcome.